In the heart of the opulent Parkview residences, where every detail seemed to be meticulously orchestrated to mirror the refined taste of its residents, one figure stood out as the self-proclaimed ruler of it all, Karen. Known for her unyielding arrogance and an air of invincibility, Karen wasn't just another resident. She was the embodiment of entitlement, convinced that her opinions were law and her solutions infallible. And so, in her latest attempt to improve the community, Karen set her sights on the parking lot. A vast expanse where even the smallest imperfection could disrupt her vision of perfect order. Karen's grand plan was as bold as it was absurd: to install boot locks on every car parked in the complex. With the zeal of a self-appointed guardian, she envisioned herself as the protector of property and order. "No thief or reckless parker shall dare disrespect our sanctified grounds," she declared, her eyes gleaming with misplaced righteousness. The boot lock, in her mind, was not merely a tool for immobilizing vehicles. It was a symbol of her unassailable authority and a beacon of discipline in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. As she roamed the parking lot armed with a toolbox and an unwavering sense of purpose, Karen's monologue was as theatrical as it was misguided. "Behold, citizens of Parkview, I present to you my ingenious creation, a revolutionary device designed to safeguard your precious vehicles. No longer shall you be at the mercy of parking hooligans or negligent drivers. With these boot locks, order will prevail." Her voice echoed off the polished surfaces of sleek cars, each lock a testament to her delusions of grandeur. Yet, beneath the sheen of luxury and Karen's self-satisfied declarations, a murmur of dissent rippled through the crowd of residents. From behind tinted windows and across manicured lawns, chuckles and whispered remarks began to circulate. To many, Karen's actions were the epitome of overreach, a flamboyant display of power that bordered on the comical. While she saw herself as a hero battling the forces of disorder, the rest of the community viewed her as a caricature, a figure of mockery in an otherwise serene tableau of suburban life. The parking lot, once a quiet arena of daily routines, quickly transformed into a stage for an unexpected farce. Karen, undeterred by the undercurrent of ridicule, proceeded with her mission, affixing boot locks with a precision that only she could claim. With every twist of the wrench, she imagined herself inching closer to becoming a legend, a vigilante of vehicular safety, an enforcer of decorum. "This is not merely an installation, it's an evolution," she proclaimed to no one in particular, her words dripping with a blend of self-congratulation and unwarranted gravity. Despite her fervor, the practical implications of her actions were glaringly overlooked. The boot locks, designed to be a deterrent against misuse, instead became a source of constant irritation and inconvenience. As residents returned to their cars, expecting the freedom to leave at their leisure, they instead encountered a metal barrier, an obstinate reminder of Karen's misguided crusade. And so, a day that was meant to herald a new era of safety quickly descended into chaos and comedy. One could hardly imagine the absurdity of the scene. Sleek sports cars, family sedans, and even the occasional vintage convertible, all immobilized by identical, unyielding locks. Each vehicle became a silent protest against the imposition of Karen's will. The irony was not lost on the onlookers. Here was a woman who had positioned herself as the savior of the community, yet her actions were causing nothing but strife and inconvenience. The boot locks, rather than symbolizing order, were now a tangible representation of how power could be misused and turned into a personal vendetta. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in Parkview residences grew increasingly charged with a mix of frustration and amusement. Karen, still blissfully unaware of the mounting backlash, continued to inspect her handiwork, her expression one of smug satisfaction. Every boot lock she installed reinforced her conviction that she was doing the right thing, that she was the unchallenged guardian of this upscale haven. In her mind, the growing line of immobilized cars was nothing short of a triumph, a physical manifestation of her unwavering commitment to order, even if it came at the cost of common sense. However, the seeds of retribution had already been sown. While Karen reveled in her self-assumed glory, the other residents began to devise a plan, a subtle yet cunning strategy to expose the folly of her actions. They recognized that behind Karen's seemingly benign act of vigilance lay an arrogance that needed to be curbed, a hubris that begged for a taste of its own medicine. Little did she know, the very symbol of her self-proclaimed authority, the boot lock, would soon become the instrument of her downfall, setting the stage for a cleverly orchestrated revenge. In the midst of this unfolding spectacle, the residents gathered in hushed conversations, plotting how best to turn Karen's prized installation against her. The scene was ripe for a classic case of poetic justice. What started as a misguided attempt to enforce order was rapidly morphing into an epic tale of comeuppance, a narrative in which the oppressed would soon reclaim their voice, using humor and satire as their weapons of choice. Yet, for now, the story remained in its opening act. Karen, blissfully immersed in her own narrative, was oblivious to the brewing storm of retribution. Her earnest belief in the righteousness of her mission painted a striking contrast against the backdrop of a community ready to reclaim its autonomy. In her mind, she was a visionary, a lone crusader standing against the tide of chaos. In reality, she was a walking punchline, her every move a testament to the perils of unchecked arrogance and the inevitable backlash that follows when one oversteps their bounds. The fallout from Karen's boot lock extravaganza had barely settled when murmurs of discontent began to ripple through Parkview residences. The once orderly parking lot, now a veritable museum of immobilized vehicles, had quickly transformed into a stage for a full-blown uprising. At the heart of this brewing storm were two unlikely heroes, John and Michael, seasoned residents known for their razor-sharp wit and a penchant for mischief. They weren't just passive bystanders. They were the architects of a rebellion fueled by a mix of indignation and the sheer absurdity of Karen's self-appointed crusade. John, a retired professor with a mischievous glint in his eyes, had spent years observing the world with a blend of cynicism and humor. Michael, on the other hand, was a former engineer whose life had become a series of ironic twists and turns. A man who could fix any mechanical problem but found himself increasingly frustrated with the illogical acts of authority. Together, they formed a dynamic duo of satirical resistance, their partnership an unspoken acknowledgement that the time had come to fight back against the tyranny of boot locks. It all started on a crisp Monday morning when residents returned to their vehicles only to be greeted by the metallic clink of boot locks clinging stubbornly to every wheel. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. Some residents chuckled at the absurdity, while others muttered curses under their breath. But as the minutes turned to hours, the humor gave way to exasperation. For many, the boot locks were more than a mere inconvenience. They symbolized an overreach of power that was as infuriating as it was illegal. John and Michael wasted no time in convening an impromptu meeting with their fellow residents. In the cramped, fluorescent-lit community lounge, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of frustration and dark humor. "I never imagined I'd see the day when our parking lot becomes a high-security prison," John quipped, eliciting laughter from the crowd. Michael added, "I always thought my car was my sanctuary, but now it's just a metal cage courtesy of Karen's genius." Their words, dripping with sarcasm, resonated with everyone present, and soon the seed of rebellion took root. The meeting quickly evolved from a venting session into a strategic planning summit. As the residents bickered over who would take the lead in this uprising, John and Michael emerged as the natural organizers of the cause. Their plan was simple yet brilliant. If Karen's boot locks were meant to enforce order, then the residents would enforce chaos. They proposed that every boot lock installed by Karen would serve as a reminder of her overbearing nature, a symbol not of safety, but of the community's collective defiance. Meanwhile, word of Karen's actions had reached the ears of local law enforcement. A stern memo circulated among the residents, outlining the legal ramifications of unauthorized installations on private property. The residents found themselves in a peculiar limbo. They were being inconvenienced by a rule breaker, yet the law was now a looming specter over their daily lives. This legal backdrop only added to the irony, as the community now found themselves in a battle not just of wills, but of rights. Amid the legal jargon and bureaucratic warnings, John and Michael saw an opportunity, a way to turn Karen's mistake into a platform for satirical protest. As the meeting drew to a close, the plan began to crystallize. The residents, armed with nothing but their wits and a healthy dose of irony, decided that Karen's bootlocks would soon be rebranded as Karen's curse, a daily reminder of the absurdity of her self-righteous actions. The proposed actions ranged from harmless pranks, such as placing exaggerated warning, bootlock apocalypse signs on each vehicle, to more elaborate schemes like rigging the locks with subtle sound devices that would emit a comic honking noise whenever someone attempted to remove them. The idea was not to cause harm, but to mock the very concept of authoritarian control, and in doing so, to reclaim a sense of humor and autonomy in their lives. In a flurry of activity that evening, John and Michael took the lead in mobilizing the residents. They divided tasks among themselves. Some were to design the prank signs with tongue-in-cheek slogans, while others, more tech-savvy individuals, were tasked with the discreet installation of miniature sound devices. The atmosphere was charged with an infectious energy, one that combined the thrill of rebellion with the absurdity of the situation. The community was no longer just a collection of residents. It was a battalion of satirical warriors, united by the shared belief that no one should be allowed to impose their will with such misguided authority. The first night of the uprising was a resounding success. As the clock struck midnight, a well-coordinated series of pranks was unleashed on the parking lot. Every bootlock was adorned with a comically oversized Karen's Curse sticker, and at the stroke of midnight, the sound devices sprang to life. Instead of the expected sinister alarms, each device emitted a series of playful honks and whimsical tunes that echoed through the lot, turning the once somber area into a carnival of mockery. The residents watched from a safe distance, barely containing their laughter as the surreal symphony of sound underscored their collective defiance. Yet, as with every act of rebellion, the response was not without consequences. Karen, upon discovering the modifications to her precious boot locks, was initially incensed. Her first reaction was to double down on her original rationale, insisting that the changes were nothing more than minor tweaks to an otherwise flawless system. However, as she attempted to operate her own vehicle and was greeted by the relentless honking, the reality of the situation began to set in. The boot lock, which she had so proudly installed, was now a source of constant embarrassment and frustration. The very instrument of her control had been turned against her, and the irony was not lost on anyone. The heated community meetings that followed became a battleground for witty repartee and caustic criticism. Karen, unable to ignore the mounting evidence of her misjudgment, found herself repeatedly outmaneuvered by the residents' clever retorts. Every time she tried to assert her authority, John or Michael would interject with a well-timed quip, leaving her speechless and the community in fits of laughter. It was a relentless parade of satire, each comment, each sarcastic remark, a dagger in the armor of her ego. The legal warnings and bureaucratic memos only added to the farcical nature of the events, transforming what could have been a serious legal battle into a mock trial of absurdity. As the days turned into weeks, the rebellion against Karen's boot locks evolved into a full-fledged movement. Residents began sharing videos and pictures of the daily boot lock comedy on social media, turning Parkview residences into a viral sensation. The once private matter of a parking lot dispute was now the talk of the town, with local news outlets even picking up on the story. Despite the growing attention, John and Michael remained steadfast in their mission. Their aim was not to humiliate Karen for the sake of it, but to illustrate, in the most humorous way possible, that unchecked power and entitlement would always be met with a well-orchestrated satirical comeback. Throughout this period, the sense of community among the residents grew stronger than ever. The shared experience of battling a common enemy, even one as absurd as Karen's bootlocks, fostered a unique camaraderie. Neighbors who had once exchanged polite nods were now actively collaborating on creative projects, laughing together in the face of bureaucratic nonsense. In the midst of this chaos, John and Michael's leadership shone brightly. They had taken an individual grievance and transformed it into a collective statement, a clear message that the community would not tolerate authoritarian antics, no matter how comically executed. The rebellion against Karen's boot lock tyranny had reached a fever pitch when an unexpected mastermind stepped into the fray. David. Known among the residents as the Prankster King, David was a man of few words but infinite mischief, a modern-day trickster with a penchant for satirical justice. As the community's frustration simmered, David proposed a cunning plan that would elevate their prank war to an art form, ensuring that Karen's self-imposed reign would be brought crashing down with every locked wheel. It all began one damp evening in the community's basement, where a clandestine meeting of the most creatively disgruntled residents was underway. John and Michael had already set the stage with their midnight pranks, but David's arrival shifted the energy. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he cleared his throat and began, "My friends, if we're going to teach Karen a lesson, we need to think bigger. We need to turn her boot locks into instruments of pure, satirical retribution. Let's give them a twist. A secret twist that only the truly rebellious can appreciate." His words hung in the air, electrifying the gathering with anticipation. David's plan was as brilliant as it was absurd. The idea was to rig every boot lock with a password, a coded sequence that, when entered, would do more than simply unlock the wheel. Instead, each lock would emit a series of hilariously timed sounds and flashing lights, a veritable symphony of mockery. The chosen phrase, "Welcome to the storm," would be triggered every time someone attempted to tamper with the lock, a sardonic reading that played on Karen's tendency to believe that order was the only acceptable state of affairs. In this new configuration, the boot locks would become an unrelenting reminder of Karen's misguided authority, a constant punchline in a running joke she would never escape. The logistics of the plan were nothing short of cinematic. David, armed with a bag of electronic mischief and a detailed schematic he had drawn on a napkin, later refined into a formal blueprint by one of the tech-savvy residents, explained that the password mechanism would involve a tiny microchip hidden inside each lock. These microchips, when activated, would not only render the lock nearly impossible to bypass without the correct code, but also set off a series of playful alarms, a chorus of beeps, chirps, and an occasional synthesized voice that cheekily said, "Did you really think you could outsmart Karen?" The objective was clear: transform Karen's symbol of control into an everyday nuisance that would slowly erode her pride and authority. As plans crystallized and the strategy was set in motion, the residents divided their tasks with military precision. A small group was charged with acquiring the necessary electronic components, scouring online forums and local tech shops for miniaturized sound modules and programmable chips. Meanwhile, another team, led by David himself, began modifying the existing boot locks. In a scene that could have been lifted from a heist movie, they worked late into the night under the cover of darkness, their tools clinking softly as they carefully drilled, soldered, and reprogrammed each lock with their new feature. The transformation of the boot locks was a sight to behold. Under the subtle glow of moonlight, each modified lock looked identical to the untrained eye, an unassuming piece of metal masking the imminent chaos within. David's handiwork was flawless. Each lock was rigged to deliver its punishing punch only when tampered with, ensuring that the prank would catch Karen completely off guard. The residents took a moment to appreciate the irony. The very thing Karen had installed to control the parking lot would now serve as a booby trap of comedic proportions. The following morning, as the sun broke over Parkview residences, the residents braced themselves for the ultimate showdown. Karen, oblivious to the quiet rebellion brewing under her watchful eye, strolled into the parking lot as usual, her expression a blend of smug satisfaction and total certainty that her plan was foolproof. With a self-assured flourish, she approached her car, a pristine sedan that had been her favorite subject for her earlier demonstrations of order maintenance. Unbeknownst to her, the boot lock on her vehicle now harbored a secret that would soon turn her triumph into a humiliating debacle. With a determined flick of her wrist, Karen attempted to disengage the lock. The moment her fingers brushed against the control panel, a series of absurd events unfolded. Instead of the smooth, obedient click of a lock releasing, the device responded with a cacophonous burst of sounds. A shrill beep followed by a jaunty tune echoed across the lot, and the tiny speaker within the lock announced in a deliberately cheerful tone, "Welcome to the storm." Karen froze, her face a portrait of disbelief and growing irritation. Around her, hidden cameras, or rather, smartphones of amused onlookers, captured every moment of her mounting exasperation. The commotion did not end there. As Karen frantically pressed buttons, trying to override the system, the lock escalated its antics. Lights began to flash in a dizzying pattern, reminiscent of a disco gone haywire, and an array of pre-programmed sound bites took turns mocking her every move. "Your car deserves a vacation. Try unlocking with a smile," one voice chimed, while another quipped, "Orderly chaos, coming right up." The boot lock had become a mischievous jester, turning the once mundane act of unlocking a car into a full-blown performance of absurdity. Karen's initial shock quickly gave way to frustration. Her attempts to regain control were met with escalating levels of comedic torment. In her panic, she resorted to wild gestures, pounding the lock, swearing under her breath, and even trying to yank the device off, only to trigger yet another round of raucous sound effects. The scene became a spectacle that attracted a growing crowd of amused residents, their laughter mingling with the persistent, mocking melody of the boot lock. Each unsuccessful attempt by Karen only fueled the residents' satisfaction, their collective mirth a testament to the power of communal retribution. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, David's plan was unfolding exactly as intended. His eyes sparkled with delight as he monitored the situation from a discreet vantage point, a remote control in his hand that allowed him to adjust the settings on the locks in real time. With a few taps on his device, he could dial up the absurdity, switching from cheerful tunes to sarcastic taunts at the perfect moment. It was a carefully choreographed dance of mischief and satire, each sound bite and light flash a deliberate jab at Karen's inflated sense of authority. Word of the Karen's curse quickly spread throughout the community, turning what was once a private squabble into a viral sensation. Videos of Karen's boot lock debacle flooded social media, accompanied by hashtags like #BootlockRevenge and #KarenStrikesBack. The residents, once subdued by the weight of her entitlement, now found their voices amplified by the collective power of humor and resistance. Local news outlets even picked up the story, their reports laced with a blend of incredulity and amusement as they chronicled the bizarre saga of a parking lot transformed into a battleground for satirical justice. The impact on Karen was immediate and profound. Once the undisputed queen of order, she found herself reduced to a laughingstock, her every move scrutinized and ridiculed. The boot lock that was supposed to secure her legacy of control had instead become the instrument of her undoing. Each morning, as she approached her car, the fear of encountering another round of electronic mockery loomed large. The daily ritual that she had once carried out with unwavering confidence was now fraught with anxiety and a sense of impending doom. It was as if the device had become a living embodiment of her hubris, a constant reminder that no one was above the consequences of overstepping boundaries. The satirical revenge didn't stop at mere electronic antics. The residents, buoyed by their initial success, began to introduce additional layers of irony into their campaign. Soon, humorous stickers and placards appeared throughout the parking lot, each one echoing the same sardonic message: Karen's boot locks, bringing order to chaos, one laugh at a time. Even the local police, initially baffled by the unconventional rebellion, couldn't help but acknowledge the cleverness behind the prank. The narrative had shifted from a simple act of defiance to a full-blown movement, one that celebrated the subversion of authority through humor and ingenuity. In the end, David's masterstroke had achieved more than just a momentary laugh. It had galvanized the community, forging a bond among residents that transcended petty grievances. As the days turned into weeks and the uproar of boot lock antics grew louder than Karen's self-assured proclamations, the stage was set for a climax that none in Parkview residences would soon forget. Karen's relentless imposition of boot locks had not only frozen the wheels of every car in the parking lot but also, metaphorically, the flow of common sense in her wake. Yet, as the community's laughter crescendoed into a harmonious chorus of rebellion, it became increasingly clear that every act of tyranny was bound to meet its satirical match. Karen, once the indisputable queen of order, found herself facing a series of escalating consequences. It all began with a fateful morning when she arrived at the parking lot only to be greeted by a scene that was nothing short of a farce. Her prized sedan, a symbol of her misguided authority, was surrounded by an entourage of playful alarms, flashing lights, and cheeky messages. The boot lock on her car, now a twisted echo of her original intentions, blared out with a zany mix of sound effects that seemed to chant, "You've been served," in an almost mocking tone. The humiliation was immediate and all-encompassing. At first, Karen attempted to double down on her authority. With the fierce determination of a general who has lost the battle, she demanded that the culprits responsible for tampering with her infallible system be identified and punished. However, the more she ranted about legal violations and administrative overreach, the more her words dissolved into a series of stuttering complaints that were quickly drowned out by the community's uproarious laughter. It was as if every syllable of her indignation only amplified the comedic irony of her predicament. The legal repercussions, too, made their presence felt. A stern notice from the local authorities arrived like a clap of thunder on a sunny day, informing Karen that her unilateral decision to install boot locks without proper permits was not only a violation of municipal regulations, but also an affront to community standards. The memo was laced with bureaucratic language that seemed almost designed to ridicule her sense of self-importance. Soon enough, news of her impending fines and legal proceedings began to spread like wildfire, turning her once lofty vision of order into a public relations nightmare. The very tools she had wielded to enforce discipline now ensured that she faced the harsh, unyielding consequences of the law. Amidst this chaos, the residents of Parkview Residences gathered for what could only be described as a final act of poetic justice. A grand community meeting was convened in the building's atrium, a fitting venue for a drama that blended the absurd with the profound. In a scene reminiscent of a courtroom farce, Karen was forced to stand before her neighbors and answer for her hubris. The room, packed with residents who had once endured her iron-fisted decrees, now buzzed with a collective anticipation for retribution. John, with his ever-present dry wit, was the first to speak. "Karen," he began, his tone laced with irony, "we appreciate your commitment to order, but perhaps next time, you might consider ordering a little humility along with your bootlocks?" His remark drew a wave of laughter and approving nods from the crowd, each person savoring the moment as a small victory over the woman who had tried to impose her will on their everyday lives. Michael followed suit, delivering a measured tirade that mixed legal jargon with biting sarcasm. "It seems," he declared, "that while you were busy locking our cars, you inadvertently unlocked the door to common sense. Now, as you face the music of legal sanctions and public mockery, let us remind you that no one is above the law or our sense of humor." The atmosphere in the room was electric. Every word was met with resounding applause and a few well-timed chuckles that underscored the sheer absurdity of the situation. The climax of Karen's downfall, however, came not from the public humiliation alone, but from an unexpected twist of fate. In a final, ironic twist, the very boot locks that had been the symbols of her misguided authority became the instruments of her undoing. As the legal proceedings unfolded, it emerged that the modifications made by the residents, a prank originally conceived as a playful jab, had inadvertently rendered the boot locks a liability. In court, evidence was presented showing that the tampered devices, now branded as Karen's curse, were not only a public nuisance but also a safety hazard. The presiding judge, with a twinkle in his eye that suggested he too appreciated the absurdity of the case, levied a substantial fine on Karen and mandated that she publicly apologize to the community for her unilateral decision-making and its ensuing chaos. Karen's apology, when it finally came, was as stilted and insincere as her original proclamations of order. In a hastily arranged press conference, she stood before a sea of cameras and community members, her voice trembling as she recounted her mistakes. Yet, even in this moment of supposed contrition, the residents' laughter could be heard in the background, a constant reminder that her reign of arrogance had finally met its match. Her apology was broadcast on local news, quickly becoming a viral sensation and cementing her status as a cautionary tale of unchecked entitlement. In the aftermath, the community of Parkview Residences found itself transformed. The bootlock saga, with its mix of technological mischief and legal repercussions, had forged a bond among the residents that was stronger than any imposed order. The parking lot, once a symbol of Karen's overreach, became a monument to the power of collective resistance and the triumph of satire over authority. Neighbors who had once lived in quiet submission now met each other with knowing smiles and a shared sense of pride. They had taken a moment of sheer absurdity and turned it into a rallying cry for common sense and humor. A lesson that no one, regardless of their self-appointed status, was immune from the consequences of their actions. Even as life in Parkview residences gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, the legacy of the boot lock debacle continued to resonate. Newcomers were regaled with tales of the infamous Karen's curse, and every time someone encountered a boot lock, they couldn't help but smile at the memory of the community's ingenious revolt. It served as a perpetual reminder that authority must always be questioned, and that humor is often the best tool for dismantling tyranny. And so, dear viewers, as we draw the curtain on this epic tale of satirical revenge, remember that the battle for common sense is never truly over. Every act of arrogance invites its own undoing, and sometimes, the simplest acts of mischief can restore balance to a world gone awry. If you enjoyed this story of rebellious wit and communal triumph, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Spread the word, and let the world know that when life locks you down, it's sometimes best to just laugh, fight back, and reclaim your freedom, one boot lock at a time.